today we're going to be taking a look at Steins, which just happens to be a science fiction show, and it's also based after a video game. And the game just happens to be a visual novel, but this one actually did come outside of Japan. But unfortunately, I have to take this one for what it is because I still have yet to play the game. You know, it seems like all the video game adaptations that I've been taking a look at this year are all games that I've never played. Well, excluding Darkstalkers, of course. But as I said, I have to take this one for what it is. I can't make any comparisons since I haven't played it. So with that said, now let's start talking about the story. So it begins in the city Akihabara, and it's the year 2010. And it stars the main character, Okabe. Although I've also heard his name as Okabe, but really just call him whatever you want. So anyways, he portrays himself as the Mad Scientist. And he runs a thing called the Future Gadget Laboratory in his apartment, where all he does is do random experiments like putting bananas in the microwave and watching alpacas on TV. Yep, living the life. But of course, he's not alone in his apartment. He actually lives with two other people, and one of them happens to be Mayuri, who is a childhood best friend of his. She's the kind of person that likes sewing, but she's also a bit of an airhead. Also, she says dirt like quite a lot. And the other person that lives with him is Daru, and he happens to be a computer hacker that is also a bit of an otaku. So one day, these three happen to go to a conference talking about time traveling, but on their way back, Okabe ends up finding out something that is really weird, and that happens to be a dead body. And the dead body happened to belong to a neuroscience researcher, who is named Kiriso. So Okabe ends up sending Daru a text message about it because, you know, finding a dead body is totally the normal thing. And this is where things get really weird because after he sends the message, it turns out that Kiriso is alive. Because he sent a text message to that one thing that they're working on, which happens to be a microwave oven that can also work as a cell phone. Yeah, that's a thing, I guess. And it turns out that that thing can actually send messages back in time. So yeah, this is one of those shows that is all about time travel. So you know there's going to be a whole lot of babble on that, and I'm not going to get too much into there. But to sum it up in an easier form is that all the messages that are being sent with that thing are called D-mails. So whenever these D-mails are sent to the past, they do change what's in the present. And it can also lead to a certain thing called the butterfly effect. And speaking of that, this show really does remind me a lot of the movie The Butterfly Effect. But only that there's no meddling teenagers writing stuff in a diary and shit. So anyways, eventually when they find out that Kiriso is alive, he wants to invite her into his apartment. So then they can investigate the whole situation. So that's where things start to take off from there. So there's plenty of situations they get into, there's a lot of characters they meet along the way. And of course, whenever they do send something from the past, some things do get fucked up and they have to like redo it again, and then when that happens, it's like a whole big chain reaction. So I think that's the basic of what you need to know about this one. And yes, there is a shitload of other things, but I'm not going to get into that here, not only because of the spoiler territory, but there's also the fact that it would just take way too fucking long. But one thing I will say right off the bat about the story is that sometimes it can be a little bit hard to follow. Mostly the beginning part, and I'll get to why in a bit. So with that said, now let's move on to the other things like the animation. I do think it is fairly good looking for the most part. All the character designs are done pretty well considering they're all casual-like. And most of the settings are fairly good, they do suit with the show, but the only issue I do have with the animation is that I find that in a lot of areas there's like way too much glare. Now I'm not sure if that's just the way how it is considering this is a game adaptation, but it just seems a little bit unnecessary. But of course I wouldn't say that's like, oh man, this like animation is just downright terrible because of that damn glare. But other than that, I really don't have much else to say about the animation. I think it looks fine the way it is. But I suppose it could be a little bit better, but either way, it's not mind-blowing, but it does work good for what it is. And now, as for the show's music, it's not too bad. It does suit the show quite well, which is good, but there is also a lot of quiet moments, which also does suit quite well. So there's not a whole lot of music within the show, but the music that is there does sound quite nice. And because I haven't played the game, I really can't say if it's accurate to the game's music, but I really don't have much complaints about it, so therefore I do think the music for what it is good. Also, the opening theme song is pretty cool too. And now, as for the show's voice acting, I think they did a pretty good job. So Okabe is being played by Michael J. Tatum, who I think does do a really good job. He really does suit the role of a mad scientist who thinks of himself very seriously but can come off as very goofy. And then Kiriso is being played by Trina Nishimura, and I think she did do a pretty good one. And then Daru is being played by Tyson Reinhardt, and I think he did do a pretty good job with him. At least they didn't try to make him sound like a typical nerdy guy, so it is nice to have something different. And then Mayuri is being played by Ashley Birch, and I think she suited this role really well. But as for the others, you do get a pretty good cast. So you got Cara Millet, Jessica Kavanaugh, Lindsay Settle, Jade Saxton, Christopher Sabat, Patrick Sates, and Eric Vale, and I think they all suit the roles pretty well, so I don't have a whole lot of complaints here. Now, before I reveal the score, one thing I do want to talk about was that whole thing with the beginning. So yes, the beginning of this show is pretty slow, and it can be a little bit hard to follow at times. So with that said, now let's begin with the score, and if I were to rate this one, I think I'm going to be very generous and give this one an 8. Despite the slow beginning, I did enjoy this one quite a bit. But as slow as the beginning was, it wasn't completely dreadful. I just think they could have just gotten the main point much better. But otherwise, I think everything else is pretty good stuff. So I did like the concept, even though it's not the most original thing ever, but I did think they did do a pretty interesting idea with it. I do think the characters are good and have some fun moments. Now yes, there is quite a few stereotypical characters here, and not all of them have the best character depth ever, but they are fairly amusing enough. But I'd say the two best characters within this show would have to be Kiriso and Okabe. Not only do I think they have some really good interactions with each other, but seeing them go through some of the situations that they go through is quite interesting. So I do think all the characters are at least somewhat likable, or very likable. But it's also one of those shows where the more you watch it, the better it gets. But as much as I do like this show, I wouldn't say it's like one of the best science fiction shows ever, cause it seems like this one does get a lot of praise, and I can definitely see why, since this show is pretty good fun, and it also does have some funny moments, some serious moments, and it also does have some pretty educational stuff. But I personally think that giving it an 8 is pretty fair, even if it is a little bit generous. And also considering that I never played the game as of yet, and by the way, I do plan on getting the game, I just don't have it as I'm recording it. But the show clearly has my interest enough that I do want to play the game to see what changes they made and such. But as far as I can tell for an adaptation, I do think they did do a fairly good job. It's really just the beginning part I think they could have just made a little bit better. Also, I'm willing to bet that a lot of the other side characters probably do have a lot more backstory than what's shown in here, but as again, I can't confirm that. But if you never played the game and you do want to see this one, I would say, yeah, it is a pretty good one. But because I'm not the Steins Gate expert, I could be totally off on this, but I'm just saying from my experience. And from that, I did enjoy it quite a bit. So with that being said, Steins Gate may not seem like the most original idea ever, but does make some pretty interesting ideas and has some pretty interesting characters, which I do think does make this anime more, well, interesting. Also, I have to say that Dr. Pepper is an intellectual drink for the chosen ones.